Hello, friends, and welcome back to another set of malicious compliance stories. Imagine your neighbor knocking on your door and saying, "Hey, I want to chop down your tree so I can sell it and buy myself a fence." You'd think it was a joke, but for one homeowner, it was 100% serious. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. The neighbor who sued a tree. A few weeks ago, my tenant called me sounding stressed. "Hey, your neighbor's been coming by. He says he wants to cut down that big monkey pod tree in the backyard." I blinked. What? Why? Apparently this guy, let's call him Jake the fence financier, decided my tree was a threat to his future fence. He told my tenant that if I didn't let him chop it down, he'd sue me when it eventually fell and damaged said fence. Then came the real kicker. Jake didn't even have a fence yet. He wanted to cut my tree down, sell the wood, and use the money to pay for his fence. That's like me demanding to borrow someone's car so I can sell it and use the cash to buy better tires for my car. I told my tenant to give him my number, figured if Jake wanted to swing his metaphorical axe, he could do it directly. A few days later, I get the call. "Hi," he starts, all polite in that fake customer service voice people use when they're about to ask for something insane. "I'm your neighbor on the east side. I wanted to discuss your tree problem." "My tree problem," I repeated. "You mean the healthy, city-approved, fully permitted tree that's been there since before either of us lived here?" He pauses. "Well, it's too close to my future fence. When it falls, it'll crush it. So I thought, why not handle it now? The lumber's worth quite a bit, and I could—" "Stop," I said. "You're suggesting you cut down my tree, sell the wood, and keep the money?" "Well, yes, it'd cover materials for my fence. I'm doing you a favor by removing a liability." I laughed. "That's not a favor, Jake. That's theft." His tone immediately changed from salesman smooth to offended HOA member energy. "I'm just trying to be reasonable. If that tree damages my property, then it'll be covered by my homeowner's insurance like every other normal situation on planet Earth." I said, "But if you step on my property with a saw, I'll consider it trespassing and call the police." There was silence. Then he snapped, "Well, the previous owner said I could have some of those mango trees too." That made me actually laugh. "You mean the owner who died 5 years ago? You think I'm going to honor some imaginary handshake deal from a ghost?" Click. He hung up. 2 days later, I came by to check on the property myself. Sure enough, Jake was standing on his side of the fence line with a tape measure and what looked suspiciously like spray paint. "Planning a heist or just redecorating the dirt?" I asked. He jumped a little, then puffed up. "I'm marking where the new fence will go. I had a contractor look at it." "Good for you," I said, "but that line's about 2 feet onto my property. You might want to adjust before your dream fence turns into Exhibit A." He squinted at me. "That tree leans toward my side. Technically, that makes it my responsibility if it falls." "Wrong," I said. "Legally, any part of a tree's trunk determines ownership. Branches, sure, you can trim up to your property line, but touch that trunk and you're committing destruction of private property. Feel free to Google it before you embarrass yourself again." Jake glared. "I'm getting a survey." "Perfect," I said. "I'll get one too." And I did. Turns out not only was the tree entirely on my property, but Jake's shed, built years before he moved in, was actually sitting a foot into mine. When the surveyors finished, I handed Jake a copy of the results and smiled. "Since you're so worried about boundaries, you might want to move your shed before I start charging rent for it." He turned red and stormed off. A week later, I got a call from his lawyer. It was clearly written by Jake himself. No letterhead, no office address, just a Gmail account and some copy-pasted legal threats about encroaching flora. I called the city arborist and forwarded them the letter for a laugh. They came out, inspected the monkey pod tree, and gave me a written statement that it was healthy, protected, and in compliance with all local ordinances. Then they stopped by Jake's house too, because as it turns out, cutting down a monkey pod tree without a permit is punishable by a hefty fine. Guess whose name just got flagged on the city's environmental enforcement list? Jake's fence never got built. My tree's still standing, shady and magnificent, spreading its branches right over his property line like a smug green umbrella. And every time I drive by, I make sure to wave at it, because that tree's done more for the neighborhood than Jake ever will. You gotta respect the confidence of a man who writes his own legal threats from a Gmail account. This guy didn't want a fence, he wanted a lawsuit starter pack. Meanwhile, the tree's just thriving, blocking his sunlight like nature's middle finger. Honestly, if there were ever a contest for pettiest win of the year, this tree would take home the gold and probably shade Jake's new lawn chair while doing it. And our second story. Our neighbor is a nosy, entitled disaster who ignores me but gives my fiance all his attention. My fiance and I bought an old fixer-upper in a beautiful neighborhood about 1.5 years ago. It had a ton of charm, wood floors, big windows, and just enough needs-work energy to keep us humble. Our direct neighbors are actually our best friends, which makes things great. But then there's Bob. Bob lives directly behind us. He used to own our friend's house next door, and apparently because our property sat empty for years, he used to take care of our yard. Which I'll admit might have been nice of him back then, until we realized it gave him this weird sense of ownership over our property. When our friends bought his old house, Bob installed a gate in their back fence so he could cut through their yard to get to the other side of the block. They've asked him repeatedly to stop using their property as a shortcut. He ignores them every time. It's like he thinks every yard around here is his personal hiking trail. Before we even moved in, my fiance went to do a walkthrough with our realtor. And who decides to just stroll right into the house like it's open house Sunday? Bob. No knocking, no, hey, mind if I look around? He just wandered in and immediately started telling my fiance what we should do with the interior. You want to knock down that wall, he said, like he was HGTV's resident expert. This room would make a great man cave. My fiance just smiled and nodded, but he texted me later, we've got a situation behind us. After we closed on the house, we started having work done. The plumbing was a mess, so we had a couple of guys over one morning fixing the old lines. I was upstairs unpacking when I heard voices downstairs, unfamiliar ones. I peeked around the corner, and there was Bob standing in the middle of the kitchen, chatting with the plumbers like he'd hired them himself. Yep, these old pipes are tricky, he was saying. You'll want to check the shutoff valve in the basement. The plumbers were looking at each other like, who is this guy? I had to step in and tell him, as politely as I could, to leave. Oh, just trying to help, he said with a smirk, then shuffled out like he'd done us a favor. It only got worse when we started renovating the garage. One evening around 5, the contractor was wrapping up, and once again, Bob appeared out of nowhere, walking straight into the open garage, poking around, asking the contractor questions about our project like he was the foreman. A few minutes later, he stomped up to our side door, pounding like a cop in a crime show. When my fiance answered, Bob shouted, "What the F is up?" We just stared at him, and he launched into a rant about how our renovations were too loud and how he can't take a damn nap with all this racket. Why was that hilarious to us? Because every single day, rain, shine, blizzard, apocalypse, Bob blasts his backyard music at full volume. And the worst part, his playlist is amazing. We're talking Motown, Fleetwood Mac, some old school funk, all the good stuff. It's infuriating because we can't even be mad. We'll be inside trying to hate him, and suddenly we're both dancing while muttering, "Damn it, Bob." But the cherry on top, Bob refuses to acknowledge my existence. He'll talk to my fiance, greet him, joke with him, but if I say something, he won't even look at me. He'll keep his eyes locked on my fiance like I'm not standing right there. It's not subtle either, it's deliberate. I could say, "Hey Bob, your gate's open," and he'll respond to my fiance, "Oh yeah, I saw that earlier." So yeah, Bob is the trifecta of neighborly chaos. A nosy gardener, a loud drunk who occasionally passes out in his lawn chair, and a casual racist who once called our mail carrier son in that tone. Living behind Bob's like living next to a live-action sitcom. Every day is a new episode. The man's a disaster. But I'll give him this, his soundtrack slaps. And our next story. A woman in a supermarket tried to eject me and take my wheelchair. So there I, 39-year-old female, was in rural Shaw's. For those not in an area with a Shaw's, it's a standard supermarket with a club that makes things cheaper, which is their way of hiding their markup. Stuff's just cheaper a few miles down the road. Unfortunately, there were a few things I could only get there, like my flavor of Lifeblood caffeine and food for the dogs. I was using my power chair, which back then I needed more often. It's an Eagle HD foldable deal, and it works great. I'd been hit pretty hard by post-COVID and was very sedentary at that time in my life, along with a pre-existing joint problem. So I'm leaning forward to get a flat of Monster and stick it under my seat on the rack when a woman pushes on my back and says, "I need that. You don't. You're younger." As I was belted in, nothing happened. It was only luck that I was belted in. Usually I would have undone it to pick up something heavy. I sat up and pushed her hands off me, saying, "What the F?" And she takes the back of my chair like it's a dinner chair or something and goes, "You can use the scooter. The chair's better and I'm old." And she points at the crappy supermarket scooter she's using. I stare at her in total shock for a moment and say, "This is my wheelchair. Get away from me. You can't use personal stuff in supermarkets. Give me the chair." She started shaking it with each statement. So at that point, I just hit the maximum speed on my power chair and took off, ripping it out of her hands. It was either let go or be dragged on her face because she clearly wasn't super steady and needed a scooter herself. And we're off on the dumbest chase in creation, mostly because supermarket scooters go slower than any other mobility device. I buzzed over to the service desk and cut the line and said, I'm really sorry, but there's a woman following me trying to push me out of my chair and take it. And from behind me, they can hear, "Get back here," and the most wheezy buzz of the slow scooter. In the moment, it was really enraging that she was being so entitled and frustrating, and I just wanted to get my dog food and leave. But in memory, it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. They let me into the little back office area, and they and the whole line of people waiting just sort of watched as she came over. And it took so long. The scooter was so slow, and she's yelling about how I don't need the chair and how she should get it because she's older and more disabled. It takes a full 20 seconds for her to get from one end of the store to the other, and everyone is just staring as she rides full of glory at 0.00001 miles per hour with her face red and her glasses hanging off one ear. So she finally gets to the desk, and they calmly explain that the wheelchair isn't store property, and if she tries to steal from another customer, they'll have to call the police. She starts shouting at the employees that she knows full well you can't bring personal equipment into the supermarket, so they're lying. And the other woman behind the counter says with a bit more attitude, "Lady, why do you think we care if you bring a wheelchair into the supermarket?" At this point, I think something either clicked or she just realized that an entire line of people were staring at her, and not kindly. She suddenly asked where to find the artichokes. I almost coughed on my own spit. The worker just stared back and pointed back where the woman had come and said, "Produce?" And the woman laughed. I admit that for the rest of my visit, I avoided any aisle she was in because I didn't want her close enough to grab me again. But here's where karma kicked in. As I was checking out, a police officer walked into the store. Apparently someone from the service desk had quietly called them after she laid hands on me. Turns out several customers had recorded her shoving my chair and yelling. When she came wobbling out of produce with her artichokes, the officer stopped her near the front doors. I didn't hear everything, but it didn't look like she handled it gracefully. She tried to argue, loudly, that she was just testing the chair to see if it was safe, but when they asked for her ID, she refused and tried to roll away. That didn't last long. The poor employee who'd been watching the chaos finally told the officer exactly what had happened, and they walked her out in handcuffs for assault and attempted theft. I totally would have laughed my butt off if I'd seen a scooter chase around a grocery store. I was thinking how crazy this lady had to be to think that folks couldn't use their own wheelchairs at the grocery store. I mean, what is a wheelchair person supposed to do? Check their chair at customer service and ask for help to be put on the store's janky scooter? And our last story. Our HOA was hyper-aggressive until they met Jeff. Now they're scared to enforce anything. Our HOA these days doesn't do much beyond basic safety stuff like keeping street signs upright and enforcing rules about curb appearance. No statuary or fountains, keep your grass trimmed, that sort of nonsense. And they're pretty tame about that. According to some of my neighbors, they were much more aggressive when the neighborhood was founded 40 years ago. Our neighborhood's split in half by a strip of forest, and right in the middle of this strip is a house owned by a guy I'll call Jeff. Now, Jeff was a manager at a local park, and a real Ron Swanson type. Jeff bought his strip of forest a few years before the subdivision was conceived, and thus Jeff is not subject to any of the HOA's rules and regulations. However, this was not going to stop the plucky young man who founded our homeowners association. No, he was determined that our neighborhood would follow certain standards, and Jeff was simply not living up to these standards. His yard was overgrown and crawling with local wildlife, and he kept a boat in his driveway. The nerve. While the president of the HOA was not having this, he arrived on Jeff's doorstep one day with a packet containing all of the standards the HOA expected its homeowners to live up to. These were such things as no window boxes, no front-facing vegetable gardens, blah, blah, blah. Jeff looked over the packet, calmly informed the president that he would make a note of the regulations, and shut the door in his face. The first thing that went up was a fence. Not a solid fence, mind you, but a board and rail fence, so that you could see what else Jeff was up to. This prompted the first of many letters from the HOA to Jeff. After he got that letter, he put up a vegetable garden front and center. Another letter arrived, and Jeff started renting out space on his lawn for people to store RVs and boats. Another letter, and Jeff put up window boxes. I don't know exactly how long this went on, but eventually it escalated to the police. As soon as they found out that Jeff was the proper landowner, they laughed in the HOA's face. Then it escalated into a civil suit about property values or whatever, and the judge dismissed the case on similar grounds. Nowadays, Jeff is retired and putters around his house day in and day out, filling up hummingbird feeders, replacing light bulbs on the Christmas lights he keeps strung up 365 days a year, run off a huge solar panel planted in his front lawn, naturally, and just generally being an awesome old dude. And our HOA has basically been neutered by the whole ordeal and hesitates to file a complaint against even the most egregious violations. I'm looking at you, family that clearly runs some sort of business out of their garage. Jeff is exactly the kind of legend every HOA deserves to meet once in its life, the immovable object that finally humbles the unstoppable clipboard brigade. The image of that founder marching up to Jeff's door all puffed up with his packet of bylaws, only for Jeff to nod politely and then immediately start trolling him with window boxes and rental RVs, that's beautiful. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.